Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about environmental anthropology. And your book does a very solid job of talking about some aspects of environmental anthropology, in particular, things like sustainability and climate change, the Anthropocene, our impact on the environment as a species, things like that. But it very briefly only mentions a couple of things that are kind of a more traditional approach in anthropology, such as ethnoecology. And so, what I want to do today actually is to talk about my own research that I've done on ethnoecology and these indigenous knowledge systems, and in particular on the cultural use of wild plants. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is Eswatini. You will hear me occasionally slip and say Swaziland, as I think I mentioned to you guys before. When I lived and worked there, it was called Swaziland. But Eswatini, the king renamed the country a few years ago to more accurately reflect the indigenous languages term for the region, for the country, as opposed to the British term, which was Swaziland, because ethnically the people are Swazi. And so the British, being real clever, called it Swaziland. So they did the same thing with the Zulu in Zululand, right? So if I slip, I apologize. It's not meant as an insult to the country. It's just habit for me at this point, right? So we're going to talk about Swaziland, or Eswatini, here. So this is actually Eswatini. If many people are kind of unaware of where it's at, I confess I was too when I was first invited to join a group of researchers funded by the National Science Foundation who were going there to do work. It is almost entirely surrounded by South Africa. It shares a little bit of a border with Mozambique. And Mbabane is the capital city, but it's a very small country. It's about the size of New Jersey, and it has about 1.2 million people there. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is as I said, the use of wild plants. And in Swaziland, what I did was I lived in 3 different villages. I did it again, Eswatini. I lived in 3 different villages and interviewed various community members with sort of purposeful sampling about what their use of wild plants was. And so what I found was that they're used as food, as firewood, for construction, for medicine, and for ritual use. Now, the first of this is food, and these are some beets that are quite commonly grown there. Almost all of these pictures that you'll see I took during my field research. Many people are gathering wild food gathering wild plants for food. It is still extremely common there to forage. Even though everybody has a garden, everybody has cows and chickens, everybody buys food at the supermarket, but they also forage. And why this matters so much is that what we have found is that wild foods have much higher levels of micronutrients. So the vitamins and minerals and things like that you and I as human beings need, wild foods are way healthier for you. Just to give you an easy example, when you go to the grocery store and you look at all the different lettuce that they have there, most of it has little to no nutritional value in it. Things like iceberg lettuce. There's nothing in iceberg lettuce for you but water. There are no nutrients in it, right? We often think of spinach as being like the best, because it's like 10 times more than most lettuces in terms of those micronutrients. Dandelion leaves, wild dandelion that is growing in your yard that you refer to as a weed, has 100 times the micronutrients that spinach does, okay? These things are really healthy, and they're really good for you, right? Additionally, there is a social dimension to it. One of the things that we find in the developing world is that women and children often lack access to food sources that men do, in terms of men are more likely to work outside the home, men are more likely to have larger social networks, things like that. And so women and children, we find, are more likely to be food insecure and to be going hungry. And so women and children are not surprisingly much more likely to be using and exploiting wild food resources, right? So this is not just healthier food, it's food that is getting to the people that need it the most. There's also a thing called economic botany, which is the study of how wild foods can be converted into income, right? And so either through cultivation or certain things that are very, very popular, maybe they're hard to come by, they're hard to cultivate. And so people that actually go out and forage for these things can make money doing that. So economic botany also includes just the revenue that you can generate. And an ancillary, I'll point out too, the money that you save by not buying things at a supermarket, right? So as a food source, wild foods continue to be extremely critical, I found, right? Another thing is firewood, and firewood is really important for many Swazis. It's important because it obviously they use firewood, right? Many people that are living in extreme poverty in the country don't have electricity. One village that I lived in, Mapavene, which I'll talk about in a minute, there was no electricity, there was no running water. Other villages and communities I lived in did have those things. So, you know, at the very base level, of course, firewood is good because it keeps you warm and it lets you cook your food, right? But on top of that, even those people that do have electricity and they have a stove, many of them still prefer certain dishes be made over open fire, kind of the way that we like to barbecue or grill burgers and dogs and that kind of stuff. They still like to do that with certain dishes in the country. But firewood's also important because what I learned there was that it functions as kind of the introductory rung to the economic ladder. And what I mean by that is that the poorest of the poor, if they don't have any resources, if they can't get a job, whatever, what they can do is go gather firewood and either sell it by the road or sell it to places like this, which is a fast food place. This is like a little chicken shack. They got a couple of little like hibachi style grills in there, and you can go in and get, as they say on the sign there, fast food. They call it chicken dust. I don't know why. And so you can take it to these places and they'll buy it because they don't pay a lot, but it just saves them a ton of time of having to go out and gather it because they're trying to run their business. And so people like my friend Dodge here, Dodge actually worked as a translator for me in Mapavene, his home village. Dodge actually, when he had no money, he didn't have a job, he said no one was going to marry me, I had no prospects. What he started doing was going out into the forest and gathering firewood up like this. And so he and I went out one day and gathered firewood together. And he would sell it by the side of the road, or he'd sell it to these little fast food places. And he did that for for like a year and a half or 2 years, I'm trying to remember. And he saved up enough money to pay to get a driver's license, right? Unfortunately, bribery and corruption are a thing in many parts of the world. And so you can't just go take a driving test. You got to pay the guy to let you take the driving test. But by doing that, he was able to get a driver's license. And because he had a driver's license, he was able to get a job working as a tech for the Royal Swaziland Sugar Corporation, which is the big sugar company there. It's owned by the king. Eswatini is a kingdom. It's owned by the king, but he was able to work there, and it was a pretty good job. He made like $2,000 a year. Not great, but enough for him to have a home, start a family. He had 2 cute little kids, and when I met him, he was actually building a little addition onto his house. He has a house made out of like stacked stone, which he covered in mud, and a thatched roof over it, which is very traditional. It's round, and he was building a kind of addition onto it because his family was expanding. So really a great success story, all because of this wild plant resource that plays a really important role in their economy. Now, I mentioned that I worked in 3 different villages, and these are them. When I would go to people, I would have them do what's called free lists. I would say, do you gather wild plants, or parts of wild plants? And if they said no, I'd say thank you. I'd say, why not? That kind of thing. And then if they said yes, I'd say, well, can you tell me all of the wild plants that you gather? And this is a listing in these three different communities, Mapavene, Rontlupego, and Shula. And in each community, how many individuals knew some wild plants, right? And so Rontlupego was the lowest. There were people that did not know any wild plants, which was quite rare. And other places that I interviewed people, they knew much more, and obviously the most was in the community of Shuula. Now, I bring this up because it's a very important thing. One of the things that I was studying there is how this knowledge gets lost, because if you ask Americans, they can't name any of them. How do we lose this traditional ecological knowledge, right? And so one of the things that I noted is that Lomtupego is very, very close to a major city, and everyone there is much more likely to be working in town. Mapavene is a very, very poor community that is located further away and doesn't have as much money. Shuula is a little bit more affluent than Mapavene, but they're much more remote, okay? They also have a conservation area near them that is owned by the community, and the community allows people to go in there and gather wild foods and wild medicines and wild things. And so some of what my research demonstrated, and this is kind of an abbreviated version of it, is to say that, having access is critical. And having need is critical, right? For people that don't need it, they don't always see value in maintaining this knowledge that's been passed down for thousands of generations. And sometimes they don't have the opportunity to. I have to go to work, man. I get up at 7 and I'm out the door at 7:30 and I don't get home till dark. And when the hell am I supposed to be going out and gathering wild plants, Josh? And whereas in these other communities, they're less likely to be working at a, office job, 9-to-5 job, whatever. And so that knowledge system is more likely to get maintained, right? As I said, you can see the distribution here. Shuula by far had the most by every kind of metric out there, and when you look at the descriptive statistics, right? One of the things that this gets into then is I'm kind of passing over construction just because, yeah, they have it for construction, that's fine. But it is for ritual and medical uses, which gets into shamanism, right? And this is actually a picture I took not in Eswatini. This is in Peru. When I took this picture when I was doing a archaeological dig there with a group of students from Santa Fe College, and I was with my old mentor, Stuart McRae. We went down to do this dig, and this is actually at this excavation site on the coast at a place called Huacacao Viejo. And this is actually a staircase that they found and excavated. It goes down about 20 feet to a natural spring at the bottom. And they found evidence of ritual use down there. In particular, they found evidence that a couple people were ritually sacrificed and killed there, along with a lot of offerings and things like that. And then their iconography in the temple complex indicates that they believed that this was sort of the home of a deity, right? So, as I said, we're talking about shamanism here and this idea of traditional healers and medicine men and things like that, and medicine women. And in Eswatini, they have 3 layers of this, and there's a lot of blend, and it gets kind of complicated. People, they themselves debate who does what, but you have Sengomas, Inyangas, and Lugedlas. Sengomas are really religious practitioners. Sengomas are individuals that will throw the bones, literally, and interpret their meaning. They will receive messages from spirits. They will speak to your dead ancestors. Swazis traditionally had ancestor worship. And so they kind of interpret things from the great beyond, right? Inyangas and Lugedlas are a little bit more of a blended mix. Again, it gets very complicated and it's not important. But basically, most people call them Inyangas. And the Inyangas are more like a pharmacist. When you go talk to them, You go to them if you're sick, and they will go gather plants and make something to heal you, right? And that kind of thing. Now, again, there is some confusion and overlap. Sangomas also use many plants both for ritual cleansings and spiritual things, but also medical, like just straight up medical, like, oh, I have a rash. It's like, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to crush up these leaves and then rub it on there. As some sangomas do that, not all. Some Inyangas, rather than just being focused on the medical side, focus on the ritual side. So there is, again, like always, a little bit of back and forth here, Now, you might be thinking that all of this is cute, but rather quaint and simplistic and unimportant, right? Like we have modern medicine, Josh. Like, why do we care about these people and their silly tribal ways of doing stuff? Well, for a couple of reasons. One, they're not silly and they're not tribal, and in fact, they're quite effective. Proof of this comes from two facts. One, it worked for 200,000 years. I mean, modern medicine is very modern, right? It's very recent. For most of our lifespan, we have been reliant on this, and the fact that we're all still here demonstrates its effectiveness. I'll also throw another statistic at you. Fully 25% of all medicines that you have ever taken come from natural sources, from natural plants, right? Whether it be aspirin or up until recently, the way that we had to treat malaria, to you name it, a huge chunk, at least 25% of all the medicines that you have ever taken. And honestly, the number was probably a little bit higher even just a few years ago as we've started to make synthetics a little bit better, but at least 25% of all of the medicines that you've ever taken are coming from plants, and in many cases coming from this indigenous knowledge of plants. When you look at something like, say, the Amazon jungle, it's estimated that there's about 750,000 species of vascular plant there. We do not have the time to go through and try to look at every single one of them and figure out what they do. But the people that have been living there for 8, 10, 12,000 years have figured out what some of those plants do. So people like me going in and talking to them is really the quickest way to try and learn about this, okay? And so that's why in Swaziland, I was interviewing Sangomas and Inyangas and Lugedlas and writing down what plants they use, writing down the treatments for things, writing down what people said, because if we do not document this, it's going away. That's what I was demonstrating with looking at those 3 villages. As these people transition to a more market economy, as they get jobs in offices and become, engineers and lawyers and nurses and everything, that knowledge is lost and you can't recover it. There's no getting it back. It's not written down anywhere, right? And so all of this gets into alkaloids, right? To let you know, like, okay, what's the effectiveness of this? Alkaloids are chemicals that we look for oftentimes because of, it gets very complicated with the chemistry, basically because of how alkaloids are structured. They interact with our brain chemistry, they interact with our biology. So some of the common alkaloids are caffeine, cocaine, nicotine, heroin, strychnine, codeine, morphine, all of this kind of stuff. Those are all alkaloids, right? And so we often are looking for alkaloids in these things. Another cool example of what I was just talking about is the Pacific yew tree. The bark of this Pacific yew tree is the most effective cancer-fighting drug that we have on the market today, right? So the best cancer drug we've got out there comes from this bark, right? So there's absolutely extraordinary things that are happening right now. The world of mushrooms is a whole other thing, man, of us trying to figure out all this third kingdom of fungus and what we can potentially learn from it and do with it. It's pretty extraordinary, right? And so this is actually samples that I bought in Swaziland, or Eswatini. This is various medical plants that are sold in the Sangoma market, in the open air marketplace. Many of you have been to one in the developing world where it's, kind of like a farmer's market here, right? There's people that are selling goods and, fruits and vegetables, and sometimes they'll be selling paint or engine supplies or auto stuff. Well, in the back corner of this one market in Eswatini that I got directed to, I happened to find these guys that they specialize in gathering these wild plants that Sangomas and Lugedlas use for healings, right? And so I bought every one of them that I could and documented what they were, and I paid the guy for them, and I paid him extra for telling me what they did with them. Like, what is this used for? What does this treat? And so I was able to document dozens of plants and what their potential uses are, so that scientists one day can explore it and see if they have something like these alkaloids that we were talking about, right? And so you have little herbal shops like this all the time and they treat everything, like I said. So they treat, pimples, ulcers, rashes, things like that, but they also treat things like libido and manpower, meaning erectile dysfunction and things like that, right? Which is not really effective. That's more of a placebo, because sometimes these things they're not always perfect. Sometimes it's nonsense. Other times, some of these things you have to kind of go in and talk to them. They don't advertise as much, but you're like, well, I need something that'll help me with a curse, or I need something that will help me with love, or these kinds of things, right? So these are all over the country, and you can find them in many places, right? Real quick, the last thing that I want to talk about actually is something that some of you may be familiar with. This is this actually is not in Eswatini. This is in the Amazon rainforest. This is a picture that I took. I know it's a little blurry. I apologize. I was in the middle of the rainforest and not the best shooting conditions ever, sleeping in a hammock and stuff. But this is actually a vine called ayahuasca that I had gone out and gathered with my friends among the indigenous group. They're the Gruffa family. They're Quechua Indians. But Angel and Augustine and I went out and gathered this. So what is ayahuasca? Ayahuasca is the most powerful psychoactive hallucinogen that we have ever studied in science. It is an extremely potent drug. They do not consider it a drug. They consider it a medicine. It has grown in popularity among Americans and tourists. Drug tourism has become a big thing as people try to go down there and go on these sort of spiritual journeys and things like that. They tend to take ayahuasca. It is an extremely powerful substance. It is also really disgusting, just to let you know. It will make you throw your guts up. It is not uncommon for people to also defecate on themselves if it's particularly potent. If it's a really strong batch, they might lose control of their bowels. So, I mean, it's not a good time. It also tastes like rotten foot. I mean, it's really not fun to take. But a couple of things that are interesting about it is that they've been looking at this, that a lot of people have anecdotally noted that it helped address other kinds of addiction. Even just using it one time, it helped them break cycles of addiction to some of those alkaloids that we were talking about. This is a very different chemical structure. So we actually do not get chemically addicted to ayahuasca the way that we do with some of those other alkaloids, where it fits into our biology, our cells, so well that when it's pulled out, we miss it, right? Well, this isn't structured that way. It's a very different chemical. So some people reported this, and so people started studying this. And there's a couple of doctors in Peru that I know of, and I know of Ecuador as well, that are looking at the use of ayahuasca as an antipsychotic. And they've done very, very small trials, and so we have to be cautious of this, but they have found that it is the most effective drug that they have seen for treating psychotic episodes and for preventing psychotic episodes. And this is being tested in labs. I mean, this is not just, crazy talk. Other labs are looking at it as a form of addiction recovery, as odd as it sounds. to take ayahuasca to help break free of alcohol addiction, nicotine addiction, opioid addiction, all kinds of stuff. And it's showing a tremendous amount of promise. So this might be something that's really amazing. Among the Quechua, they have shamans who are called yachaks, right? Shaman is, I've said before, just an outside word, right? No one calls themselves shamans. It is a German mispronunciation of a word used by peoples in northern Russia, right? But nonetheless, the yachaks or shamans there will often drink ayahuasca to go into a trance, to go into the spirit world. And there they will talk to the jaguar spirit, which is sort of a dominant jungle spirit in their mind. And that will help them see the future. It will help them see prophecy. It will help them do all of this kind of stuff. People will also take it with the shaman and have visions that the shaman will then interpret for them. And so this is a cultural practice that, I have to be honest, as an anthropologist, when I hear people taking it for fun and recreation, I find very problematic, because the point of the ceremony is not about you. It's not about your trip. It's not about, it's about us. It's about you having this vision and me having this vision, us having a vision together. When we talk about your vision, it's you, the elders in your village, your neighbors, your family members, everyone coming together, supporting you, reifying your place in our community and things like that. Whereas what Americans seem to be doing is just individualistic pleasure seeking. So I'm a little bit dubious of it, to be honest with you. But it is a hell of a thing, I can assure you. But there's something cool about this that I want to mention. And it's kind of a neat thing. So ayahuasca is this vine, right, that you can see here chopped up. It just grows up the side of trees. This is a pretty thick one right here. And this is a plant called Psychotria viridis that is from the coffee family. When they make ayahuasca, what they do is they take those chunks of wood and they soak it for a very, 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 very long time in water. And then they boil it and boil it and boil it. I'm talking about a huge, like, cast iron cauldron, big, 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 big. They're going to boil that thing down to a small pot that you would have in your kitchen. It's very thick. It is very strong. The more they boil it, the more potent they get it. But one of the interesting things is they actually throw the leaves of this plant in there. Now, when scientists started first looking at ayahuasca, they looked just at the ayahuasca and they couldn't figure out why it was so powerful, because it does have this chemical in it that is very much like brain serotonin, and it mimics some chemicals that are in our brain. But the thing is you can't just drink it, because our stomach acids sort of make it lose its potency. And so it would have an effect on you, but it would just be a kind of a mild intoxicant, right? And so we couldn't really figure out how it was working so well until somebody realized, oh, it's not just ayahuasca that they're putting in there, they're putting this other plant. Well, this other plant has an inhibitor that allows your body to drink the ayahuasca and for it to not get turned off, right? Now, I was saying that this is a vine. Well, this is a shrub. So how is it, as I mentioned a minute ago, 750,000 plants in the Amazon rainforest, at least. How is it that they found two that don't look alike, that don't grow together, combined them to make literally the most powerful hallucinogen that we've ever found? That's an extraordinary thing. And people say, well, trial and error. Do you know how many millennia it would take to randomly put plants together and just see what they do? Oh yeah, a lot of them are poisonous too. And so you just start randomly putting plants together, it'll kill you, like, rapidly, right? So how do they do it? Well, the truth is we don't know. When we asked them, and I have, they said it's really easy. The plants speak to us, right? We take these plants, and go into the spirit world, and they tell us what to do. The spirit of the plant communicates it. Well, I'm a scientist. That doesn't give me a lot to work with, but as an anthropologist, it does give me a lot to work with. It doesn't give me a lot to work with to understand it, understand the development maybe, but it does tell me a lot about their relationship to plants compared to, say, me and you, right? They believe plants talk to them. They believe plants have a spirit. They believe plants want to communicate. And when you go into the rainforest, these people know hundreds of plants, right? You and I know none. You and I are like the community in Eswatini, Tlontlonpego, that people couldn't name any. And none of those people think plants have a spirit. None of those people think that plants are trying to talk to them. And so while no, plants talking to you isn't particularly helpful to me to explain how this knowledge came to be, it is important for me because it tells me how this knowledge has shaped your relationship with the natural environment, and how a difference in perspective can radically alter what you're doing, you know. And so lastly, just to mention, this is all about ecological knowledge, sometimes called traditional ecological knowledge, or tech, and conservation and these kinds of things. And I know we were talking about plants, and here I have an elephant, but it is all interrelated. When you look at ethnoecology, or ethnobiology as it's sometimes called, it's ethnobotany, the study of plants. It's also ethnobiology, the study of the human interactions with animals, which is a lot of what I do now, having done ethnobotany before. You know, what I was just saying about this indigenous knowledge and how it is maintained at the same time as this very different perspective on the natural environment, those things go hand in hand, you know, and I do think, and many anthropologists think, that it is something that we should spend some time looking at. Spend time respecting that radically different viewpoints can lead to radically different results. And considering the fact that in about the last 200 years, you and I have managed to set the planet on fire, maybe we need some radically different new ideas and our approach to the natural environment. So on that note, thank you guys. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you next time.